can just ask everyone to take a seat. Great. Well, welcome everyone to this meeting of the Planning Committee. You're all extremely welcome. My name is Councillor James Husband. I'm Chairman of the Planning Committee. To my right, I'm joined by my fellow councillors, members of the committee, and it will be the five of us this evening who will make the decisions in front of us. To my left, I'm joined by various planning officers. They will be presenting the officers' report and offering us advice as we go through the evening. The officer team is led by the Director of Planning and Place, Amanda Reid, who's the lady sitting on my immediate left. Okay. So we can make a start. First of all, are there any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. There are no apologies for absence tonight.
No. Okay, that is fine. Secondly, are there any declarations of interest? Are there any other declarations? No. Okay, very good. Well, in that case, we can move very quickly to the main item on the agenda, which is the application for the site at 81 to 103 Kings Road, SW3. And what's going to happen is that in a moment or two, the case officer, Laura Fogarty, supported by her team leader, Martin Lomas, are going to present the report. We will then have an opportunity for objectors to the scheme to speak. They will then be followed by the applicant team having an opportunity to speak. And once both sides, if you like, in inverted commas, have spoken, then members of the committee are able to ask questions of both parties. So, I hope that's clear. So, Laura, would you like to go ahead and present the report?
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to draw the committee's attention to the addendum report, which contains changes and corrections to the officer's report. I've also received some additional representations, which are printed and situated around the room. The application site is located on the south side of the King's Road, occupying numbers 81 to 103. The site is bordered by Charles II Place to the south and southeast, Atlantic Court to the east, and commercial uses on the King's Road to the north. To the western boundary of the site is a servicing road, providing access to a basement car park and to Charles II Place. Currently occupying the site is a Part 3, Part 4-storey building with a basement level fronting the King's Road. The building is in retail use at ground and basement level, with one large unit currently operated by Marks & Spencer and two further smaller retail units. The upper levels of the building are in office use, and the basement level includes 106 car parking spaces, primarily associated with the large retail unit above. The site is not located within a conservation area. However, it is located adjacent to the Royal Hospital Conservation Area, which lies immediately to the west and south. The Chelsea Conservation Area lies to the north, on the opposite side of the King's Road, and extends further north. You'll see on this map, the application site is in the red line, and the coloured areas represent the listed buildings. This image shows the extent of the existing site in the context of the wider street. And this image shows the service road to the western boundary of the site, which provides access to the existing basement car park and egress from Charles II Place. Planning permission is sought for the demolition of the existing building and the construction of a 4-storey replacement building to re-provide a large retail store at basement and ground floor levels and 2 additional retail units. It is proposed to provide office floor space at the upper floors. The proposal would utilise the existing basement level. Permission is also sought for the installation of plant and associated works. A previous redevelopment for the development proposal for the site was submitted in March 2021. This proposed the demolition of the existing site and replacement with a 5-storey building with a central courtyard, roof terraces, and associated works. This application was refused due to the unacceptable impact upon the level of daylight amenity currently experienced by the occupiers of numbers 1 and 2 Charles II Place. The development proposes a substantial uplift in office floor space, with a net increase of 7,844 square metres. The development proposes flexibly designed retail space at ground and basement levels. The proposed uplift in office floor space is compliant with local plan policy CF5, which supports the development of new office space in a town centre location. The proposed retail floor space across the site is 3,799 square metres. At present, the building has a total of 4,548 square metres of retail floor space. The proposed development would therefore see a net increase of 749 square metres of retail floor space. The proposed redevelopment as a whole would provide a total uplift of 6,246 square metres of Class E floor space. These floor plans show the retail units at ground and basement level in yellow and the proposed office lobby use in blue. These plans show the proposed office space in blue on the first, second, and third floors alongside the roof plan. This slide shows the proposed Kings Road elevation to the north of the site. The proposal would see a 1-storey increase in height compared to the existing. At third floor and roof level, the massing of the building is stepped back. This image shows the proposed site frontage and its relationship with a wider street. The image above shows the proposed southern elevation, which shows the rear terraces and the associated planting. This visual shows the proposed service road to the west, looking north. The entrance to the car park is seen on the far right, and the servicing entrance is shown in the centre of the image. This visual shows the service road to the west, looking south towards Charles II Place. The next few slides show key views of the site from surrounding streets. These images show the existing and proposed view of the site from the Kings Road at the junction with Bywater Street. These images show the view of the site from the south of Markham Street. And finally, these images show the view from the site from the north of Markham Street. In terms of parking, it is proposed to re-provide a car park at basement level with 29 spaces, which includes 2 blue badge spaces. This car park is to be accessed via a ramp to the rear of the service road. The access route is shown by the blue arrow on the first plan. The existing basement car park currently has 85 spaces for use by customers of the Marks & Spencer store. Therefore, the proposed redevelopment would see a total reduction of 55 car parking spaces. In considering the impact upon neighbours, the drawing above denotes the distances between neighbouring properties to the south on Charles II Place and the proposed building, showing a total distance of 17.5 metres between the first floor windows of the proposed building and the closest property on Charles II Place. The upper floors are stepped back, increasing distances from properties on Charles II Place to the south. At second floor level, there is a separation distance of around 23 metres, and at third floor level, a distance of 27 metres between the facades. The blue line represents the existing building, demonstrating that the proposed building will be set back by 1.5 metres at ground level. The drawing above shows how the issue of overlooking to neighbouring properties to the south will be addressed. The rear facade has a step design, allowing for increased distances from neighbouring properties on the upper floors. The terrace at first floor level is proposed for maintenance access only and is not available for users of the office. This is secured by condition 14. The second and third floor terraces are set behind deep planters to the perimeter of the building, restricting their size and views to Charles II Place. Members should also note that the second floor terraces sit above the roof line of the Charles II Place properties. Again, the blue line represents the existing building, demonstrating that the proposed building is set back by 1.5 metres at ground level. This image shows an aerial view of both the southern and eastern terraces, illustrating the depth and the structure of the proposed planting. The red arrows show the locations of the terraces. To the rear, the terraces are limited to the second and third floors, and to the east, the terraces are located at first and third floors. This image shows the view from the first floor level offices looking south. As previously explained, this terrace, while providing extensive planting, will only serve access for essential maintenance. These images show the view out of the first floor office and terrace looking east towards 1 to 4 Charles II Place. The final image shows the extent of the first floor terrace and depth of the perimeter planting. These images show the existing and proposed view of the proposed building from 40 Charles II Place at ground floor level. Number 40 is located directly to the south of the proposed building. The red line shows the extent of the existing building in comparison to the proposed. Immediately below the red line is the first floor of the proposed building and the proposed inaccessible terrace. These images show the existing and proposed views from ground and upper floor windows at 46 Charles II Place. In terms of other surrounding streets, these visuals show the view of the proposed building compared to the existing third floor level of 35 Smith Street. Due to the additional story, the building is more visible from this location, however, is situated over 50 meters away from the property. This image shows the view from the third floor at 41 Smith Street. As previous, the proposed building is more prominent, however, is located over 40 meters away from the property. In considering the proposed demolition and rebuild, the London Plan does not prohibit demolition, but requires that priority consideration be given to retention and retrofit. The applicant has considered 5 options for redevelopment, including refurbishment options, and has demonstrated that the proposed demolition of the building is justified for reasons including structural constraints and the poor energy performance of the current building. In terms of the proposed building, consideration has been given to building design to incorporate energy-saving measures. An energy-efficient electric heat pump strategy is proposed, alongside an energy-efficient air source heat pump to provide heating and hot water. Similarly, high-performance openable windows are proposed to reduce solar glare and manage cooling and overheating. In addition, solar panels are proposed on the roof of the building. In the determination of this application, the decisive issues within the planning balance are the principle of development and land use, design and heritage, impact upon the neighbouring living conditions, sustainability, and transport and highways. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So we now move to our speakers, and I'm going to invite objectors to speak first, and I think each side is going to have up to 12 minutes in total, and I believe that Mr. Forrest, Ron, you're with us, that I think you're going to lead off for the objectors. So please, you're obviously a near neighbour in Charles II Place, so when you're ready, please go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Chairman. Before we start our presentation, I think you wouldn't mind me introducing the people who are here tonight to speak, which I'll do before we start.
Yes, I think that's a good idea, yes.
Okay. Well, I'm Ron Forrest from Charles II Place. With me is Graham Sharp from Smith Street. We're representing 2 of the 15 resident associations that have worked together on a working party. With us tonight to speak, we have planning consultants, Tom Ashley and Gail Collins, and we also have representing the Chelsea Society, Marina Murray, who are all here on the front bench. With us, we also have consultants who are on the row behind me. So we have Martin Court from Sharps Redmore, noise consultants, Chris Armstrong from Quinn Ross Energy, who's a carbon expert, and Paul Veloé, chartered architect, who's a heritage expert.
Thank you. So that's helpful.
Do you want me to start?
So please
start the stopwatch
ahead.
now, sir?
Yes, of course.
Well, as I said, I'm the chairman of Charles II Place. The 51 houses most directly threatened by this proposal. Those members who've kindly made a site visit will appreciate how intimidating the prospect of an over 22-metre tall building with windows and terraces overlooking your homes and gardens will be. We're also speaking to the very deeply held concerns of the wider community, including Smith Street and the 15 other resident associations that I mentioned. We've been working together to oppose this development, and we represent hundreds of residents in addition to the MP and ward councillors, and we also have cross-party support from other councillors. Our consensus is that due to the height, mass, terraces and overlooking of residential properties, this development is wholly unsuitable for this historic area. Paul Veloé, an eminent heritage architect whose report has been sent to each of you, has confirmed that this application is damaging to Chelsea and its heritage assets, reinforcing the views of over 1,500 formal objectors and over 4,300 petitioners. Paul is among our consultants and will answer any specific questions. This and other new substantial and material information provided to you undermines many of the applicant's assertions and allows your committee to make a more informed decision reflecting established and emerging planning policy, despite the comments in the addendum report from your officers. On behalf of the Chelsea community, we therefore urge you to refuse this application as it seriously damages Chelsea's heritage assets and breaches the development plan. Our next speakers will be Tom and Gail. Tom.
Thank you. Councillors, principle of development. Whilst the proposed development will provide additional office floor space, the Council's own evidence base confirms there is sufficient supply of pipeline of new office floor space to meet demand for the next 20 years. The proposed new office floor space will thereby be of limited public benefit. In addition, the proposed development results in the loss of retail floor space, which comprises approximately 1/3 of the existing shopping area. The Council's own evidence base shows that there is a shortfall in retail floor space in the borough. The development will further exacerbate this shortfall. This is directly contrary to policy CF3. Heritage. The significance of the adjacent conservation areas and the setting of the nearby listed buildings is shaped by the early to mid-19th century residential commercial properties of consistently modest scale, generally no more than 3 or 4 domestic stories in overall height, creating a distinctive roofscape. The height and bulk of the proposed development poses a large threat to the setting and significance of the conservation area and the nearby listed buildings. Despite this, officers consider there is no harm from the proposed development. However, the GLA consider there is harm, as does Paul Veloé, who considers the level of harm to fall on the boundary between substantial and less than substantial. Policy requires any harm to the historic environment to be balanced by the public benefits of the proposed development. Officers have not undertaken this balancing exercise. It is considered that the public benefit of the schemes are very limited and do not outweigh the identified harm to the historic environment. Townscape. Contrary to the advice set out in the committee report, it is considered that the proposed development would be significantly taller than the surrounding townscape. Specifically, the development would be an entire office story and higher roof taller than the majority of the surrounding properties. It's clear from the submitted elevations and visualizations that the form, scale and massing of the building would not sit comfortably within the context of the site and would not make a positive contribution to the local character and distinctiveness of the area. This is contrary to policy CL12. Sustainability. The redevelopment would result in a 37% greater loss of embodied carbon when compared to refurbishment of the existing building. Emerging policy GB2 of the local plan prioritises retention and refurbishment over demolition. London plan guidance requires the benefits of redevelopment to clearly outweigh the harms arising from demolition. The redevelopment will not deliver sufficient benefits to outweigh the harm of demolition. Notably, the further office floor space is of limited benefit. The loss of retail is contrary to policy. The proposals fall short in respect of energy and sustainability standards required by policy, and the redevelopment will cause harm to the historic environment.
In terms of the impact on living conditions, Charles II Place and Smith Street currently enjoy a harmonious relationship with the M&S building. There are no near windows, balconies or terraces. They are not currently overlooked. Overlooking is material to the determination of planning applications as set out in Local Plan Policy CL5. This proposal introduces opening windows, doors and external terraces facing onto the private backs of houses and their gardens. Officers acknowledge that the council separation distance of 18 metres is not met. Houses will be overlooked. Only 15 metres is achievable from overlooking windows to the houses to the south, less to their gardens, and only 8 to 9 metres to the east to the edge of the proposed first floor terrace. Living conditions plan in the officer's presentation is misleading because it shows only 12.6 metres between the backs of houses to the south with Smith Terrace, whereas in fact there are between 20 and 27 metres. The scheme relies on planting to protect privacy. I have visited the architect's 127 Kensington High Street. That context is very different. Windows and external terraces face a busy high street junction. The planting on the external terraces does not prevent clear views into the apartment windows opposite. Planting cannot prevent overlooking. Plants take time to establish, will die and do not always grow as required. Planting also offers no protection against the passage of noise or light. A recent decision at 33 Charles II Place for a domestic extension was subject to a condition preventing use of its roof to avoid overlooking neighbours. Domestic extensions in Smith Street have been similarly restricted. It is perverse to permit overlooking windows and terraces in this large commercial development. The building will also breach the policy CL5 requirement of no harmful increase in the sense of enclosure. The proposed building is effectively double the height of the flank houses. The houses to the south are built below the application site's ground level. This, combined with the bulk scale and mass of the new building and its overall proximity, will have a significant impact on residents' outlook. The applicant's own visuals demonstrate this. Officers agree that the new building will bring an increased sense of enclosure. The objectors do not agree that site optimisation, planted terraces and the use of high-quality brickwork will overcome this harmful impact. Your officers also recognise that there are numerous transgressions of the BRE guidelines in respect of rooms in 10 Charles II Place properties, with diffuse daylighting in 4 properties likely to be adversely affected. Policy requires maintenance of good daylight standards, and where they are already substandard, that there should be no material worsening of the conditions. Policy CL5 also requires that the reasonable enjoyment of the use of buildings and gardens is not harmed due to increases in traffic, servicing, noise and disturbance. Those who have visited Charles II Place will note it is a surprisingly quiet oasis. We have serious concerns over the applicant's acoustic survey. The background noise level monitoring locations are wholly unrepresentative of the noise environment of Charles II Place. It fails to cover all noise sources and relies on a superseded British standard. Our own noise measurements were considerably less. The problem with using incorrect baseline noise levels to inform conditions means there is potential to be a significant noise impact to nearby residents. The London Plan Agent of Change Policy D13 requires development proposals to clearly demonstrate how noise and other nuisances will be mitigated and managed, and it is not met. Put simply, this proposed commercial multiple occupier building with nearly 64% more floor space, opening windows and external terraces, closer servicing and plant will inevitably result in materially more noise and disturbance than neighbouring quiet residential streets. In conclusion, the objectors do not agree with the argument that site optimisation is acceptable at the expense of neighbours' living conditions. The proposal is contrary to the development plan. The suggested conditions do not overcome these fundamental objections. Martin Court, who carried out the objectors' noise survey, is available to answer any questions. Thank you, Maria.
Good evening. I'm speaking for the Chelsea Society, which has over 1,000 members. I hope you received Paul Lever's letter emailed to you on Sunday. The Chelsea Society believes the proposed building would damage the heritage and character of Chelsea. Our objections are these. It would entail the demolition of a serviceable building less than 40 years old. The building is too big. It would be much taller than the present one and higher than any other building in the immediate vicinity. We think the officer's assertion that the building would not be significantly taller and that therefore the Council's policies on height do not apply, is incorrect. We ask you, please, to accept the facts and figures in Paul Velue's report of 26 September and his comments on the officer's report dated 30th September. We believe the proposed building does not respect its location or setting. It is too high and bulky and too dominant for the site. It would be visible up and down King's Road, from the entire length of Markham Street and from houses and gardens in the adjacent residential streets. The harm it would cause is not balanced or outweighed by any public benefit. We endorse completely the concerns of those residents most closely affected and ask you also to reject the application because of the wider damage it would do to the King's Road. Thank you.
I'm one of the 6 ward councillors who objected to this application. Residents have noted the recent news that M&S has reached a non-binding agreement to keep some presence at the site. This cautiously positive agreement in principle does not address the outpouring of planning-based objections this application has attracted. Just because a resident listed the loss of the current M&S as one of their multiple concerns, it does not follow that their entire objection can be characterised as M&S focused. The substantial planning-related concerns that residents have expressed will not be addressed if this application goes forward, even if M&S stays on site in some form. As councillors, we are guardians of the public realm. The King's Road is one of the most iconic streets in London. In a time of real concern over the environment, we should not knock down a serviceable building after barely 40 years to replace it with a bigger, bland building that is unlikely to stand the test of time and does not enhance Chelsea. We need to do better, and I urge you to refuse this application.
Thank you very much. That's very good, and just inside 12 minutes. So thank you very much indeed. That's very helpful. Now it's the turn of the applicant team, and I think Mr. Morris, David Morris, you are with us, sir. So if you would like to lead off, maybe perhaps in similar fashion, it would help my colleagues, if you could just introduce, just very briefly, who's going to speak, because I'm guessing you also have people who will answer questions if necessary. Can you do that just very quickly?
Of course I can.
And then obviously you've got up to 12 minutes as well.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm David Morris, a Board Director at DP9 Planning Consultancies. Fred Bilpro is the architect with us. We have various consultants here to speak to disciplines. Molly is here on daylight, Andrew behind on energy, and Phil here on transport, Dan on
that's very helpful. Do you mind speaking up a little?
Sorry, apologies.
No, these microphones
Forgive me.
aren't terribly good.
How's that?
So when you're ready, that's good. When
Excellent.
you're ready, so you have up to 12 minutes as well.
Okay.
Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. This is a very important and sensitive site. We all accept that and appreciate it. And I think this is best evidenced through the commitment, the ongoing commitment we've had to consult in a very thorough and regular manner. The applicant will remain the custodians of this site for many generations to come. That's their business and that's what they do. So an open and positive relationship with the local community is of the utmost importance in that regard. They intend to deliver this scheme in an incredibly difficult market. It's very important to say that. They're committed to do this. The existing site does not meet the ambitions for the Royal Borough and the King's Road. It's a poor quality building. It's deliberately been excluded from the conservation area. It contains vacant offices which are not capable of being let, and it has inadequate retail, as evidenced through Marks & Spencer's commitments to the new store. So it must be better. Consultation has been at the heart of our approach, and wherever possible, we have sought to address and resolve issues and concerns. Our client has consistently listened and adapted the proposals. We've held over 18 residents' meetings since the summer of 22 for this new scheme. And we have been applauded by some, many, for the breadth and depth of the consultation exercise that's been undertaken. These discussions have confirmed what we all know. There is a strong and thriving community in Chelsea, and this scheme will deliver a significant change to that community, and that change must be positive. Planning is always a balance. There are often competing pressures, as we know, which require careful thought. We truly believe the proposals this evening strike the right balance. As your papers describe, the pre-application and post-application proposals have continually evolved in response to feedback and comments from neighbours. The objections raise a number of points which the report addresses very thoroughly. We're very happy to answer questions, and no doubt some of those will be directed to officers. But by way of comments, I would offer the following. We are retaining the existing Marks and Spencers in a bespoke unit that's been designed for them. This is wonderful news for the King's Road and has taken a long time and a lot of discussion to reach this point. As everybody knows, the retail landscape is incredibly tough, and the King's Road needs to continue to be relevant and appealing. And we hope that this major anchor will contribute something to that ambition. The proposals provide the King's Road frontage with a quality deserving of its status. By pulling the building line back, we are able to increase the pavement by 47% and introduce new planting and seating. A new 4-storey office building is proposed, which will reinforce the King's Road as a destination where people will want to work. Best-in-class buildings with this mix of uses will only help the vibrancy and long-term survival of the King's Road in this post-COVID digital age. The scheme has been applauded by those stakeholders who provide you with professional guidance on design. That process of review and comment has positively contributed to the overall design that is presented this evening. No harm has been identified to the heritage assets in the area, whether that be listed buildings or conservation areas. Officers believe that this will be a positive contribution to the townscape. As I've said, the scheme has changed significantly in consultation with our neighbours, not just from the refuse scheme, but since. And we've worked hard to set back terraces, increase separation, distances, and respect privacy and neighbouring amenity. Minimising daylight and sunlight impacts has been central to that approach. The scheme delivers a significant positive change to the King's Road, and it is important that those impacts are minimised. Your report summarises the acceptability of these minor changes and why officers are recommending approval in light of them. The scheme is truly sustainable. It delivers workspace and retail in the heart of Chelsea, close to where people live. Dependency on the car is lessened, and the carbon saving from the new technologies deployed to run this building are class-leading. The landscape strategy delivers a significant contribution to the local urban greening factor and a 90% reduction in surface water runoff. These are major improvements to the environment of the King's Road. We're incredibly proud of the proposals presented this evening. We recognise the strength of feeling around them, and we hope that the submission and our ongoing conversations have addressed these concerns. And I would reiterate that those conversations would go beyond any decision made this evening to the way this thing is built and run. Our client, as I've said, is committed to build this scheme. The recent news between our client and Marks and Spencers is a major step in that journey. We thank officers for their hard work in delivering the recommendation this evening, and to the Planning Committee for their time to consider the item. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else on the applicant team wish to speak?
Not this time, no. Thank you.
No. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Well, that's very good, because that didn't take too long. So we can move on to an important aspect of the proceedings, which is it's an opportunity for members of the committee to ask questions. So who'd like to go first? Actually, Councillor Hargreaves, Gerard, to go first. And we've got a lot of people, obviously, who can potentially ask, so we need to be careful that we say who we're asking a question of. But Gerard, you go ahead, you lead off.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'd like to address my question to David Morris. In your submission, and you mentioned briefly about the various options you'd looked at for this building, and I'd like to you to explain a little bit more to us why you rejected the option of redeveloping of the actual existing building. You know, you talk about energy. There's lots of schemes now for retrofitting, for redesigning buildings that exist already. And I need to be really convinced, if I'm going to support this, and that's an if, that actually you have looked at all those, because this is a very young building, and I'm not convinced that that it can't be refitted.
I understand. Well, I'll give you an initial answer, and then I'd like to hand over to Fred, who can add more. I think our practice, Fred's practice, has a long-standing tradition of using buildings where you can. That's very important. These buildings have embodied carbon, so this is not a decision that's taken lightly. It is a statement of fact that buildings of this area were not designed with other uses and other intentions in mind in the way that we think about buildings today. So I think it's very important to say, by way of opening, that this is a building which can be adapted and can change without the need to demolish it in the future. And I don't think that was in the psyche of designers 40 years ago. I mean, to the practical issues, 5 options were considered, and Fred will speak to them in a minute. The issue with the existing building is the constraints it offers to provide good quality retail. There is a step down, as many people will know, in various parts, so there's a level change, and the floor to ceiling heights of the offices. So you are always constrained by those points. And then it goes further, which is to manipulate the existing building, which is something that we have considered. You start to expend more carbon than if you drop the building and then thought very thoughtfully about the replacement. But I'll hand over to Fred, who probably want to add more.
Councillor, thank you for your question. I'm Fred Pilborough of the Architects Pilborough and Partners, and we tested, as you note, a variety of alternatives, including refurbishment of existing buildings. I think in that regard, it's important to say that it needs to be recognised the existing buildings are of low quality, and it's no accident that they're excluded from the conservation areas that surround the site. I mean, broadly, you've got a utilitarian retail shed in the majority of the building, and then on the King's Road, a narrow rind of offices. Outlook for neighbours is over flat roofs with exposed air conditioning plant. There's no greenery, no landscaping. It's a bleak and utilitarian outlook. And on the King's Road, those offices are very, very compromised. Low floor to ceiling heights, poor arrangement for access, narrow and inflexible floor plates. Now, we're very confident there's demand for high quality and sustainable workspace here in Chelsea, but this calibre of space is very, very compromised and wouldn't attract tenants. Indeed, as David remarked, the building today is vacant. We looked at retaining those structures, and what we would have delivered would be highly compromised and, I believe, unviable. I think its replacement offers the opportunity to produce a high-quality Chelsea building that will be to the benefit of future generations. It will be of the highest calibre of sustainability, and we are going to reuse the existing basement slab, which both shortens construction and reduces carbon.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions. I'll just start with. I'll start with the M&S. So Councillor Emma Will mentioned, obviously, that we all know M&S is committed to remaining at the location, but that it's a non-binding commitment. How confident can we be that they will actually remain there? And then following on from that, a further question around the use of the office versus retail space. So obviously we're losing, this proposal means we lose retail space. I think if we take a town centre first approach, we want to maintain the vitality of the use of the ground floor for retail purposes. I understand that I think the design is that it will only be used, office space on the ground floor will only be the office lobby. However, that is, from what I can see, almost an entire half of the building. Can you explain why you've come to that conclusion, whether the lobby can be smaller, or what you can do to ensure that the vitality at the ground floor is maintained? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take those in turn, if that's okay. I would characterise the agreement between the applicant and Marks and Spencer's as significantly better than described. Archie Norman, who is the chairman, has been directly involved in those discussions with the chairman of the applicant's company. It is a binding agreement. It is in the applicant's interest to do that deal. It is one of the best trading stores in the Marks and Spencer's portfolio. To give you some assurance and to put some context to those conversations, as members and ward councillors know, these discussions have been going on for a number of years, and Marks and Spencer's, it's well stated in public, have been going through a pretty transformational time to work out how they reposition their stores and their profit and their property portfolio with a view to maintaining a profit, because they've been through a pretty difficult period, as has retail generally. So if there has been some tardiness to those discussions, it's because I think Marks and Spencer have been working out what to do with in excess of 250, 300 stores, and we're just one of them. But I'm really pleased that those discussions have moved to where they are. You know, planning is a major hurdle in those discussions between them, but this scheme, the specifics of the brief have been delivered in conjunction with them. Fred, as you will probably know, works for them directly elsewhere, so we have a high degree of confidence that this is exactly what they want. And of course, in terms of the delivery of the scheme, it's very important because it's effectively a pre-let in a very, very difficult retail environment. On the matter of sort of office versus retail, you're quite right. There is a reduction. It's just under 750 square meters. I think the best way to describe that is that is effectively the trading space that Marks and Spencer's use at the moment. The existing condition, as you'll appreciate, is very inefficient. And of course, they are taking less space, and we've been able to create two additional retail units. So I think in terms of the quantitative element, of course, yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a loss. I would offer that from a qualitative perspective, a major anchor tenant and two smaller units would really help the King's Road in this this junction. To the office entrance, again, in a very, very changing world, we hold many meetings these days on Teams and online. Attracting people back to the office requires, best-in-class space, and it's an overused phrase, but it's very true, which is this flight to quality. An office entrance is a big part of that experience. I'm not an office agent, but there was a very, very strong feeling that the entrance experience needed to be presented in the way it is to support the kind of tenants that would come here. I think it's also worth saying that the entrance to the office in itself is not a dead space. It's a very animated space that will in itself offer a lot of character and vibrancy to the King's Road. But I completely acknowledge your point. There is a loss of retail.
Might I add a word, David? There are 12 windows to the east of the entrance to the Mews. 2 of them are dedicated to the office entrance and 10 to retail, and that retail, as David mentions, includes both the reprovision of the M&S but also 2 smaller independent retail units. And I think both the quality of the retail, its diversity, and the presence of the office all will contribute positively to the King's Road and its future success.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 questions, if I may. I'll try and keep them as concise as possible. The first one relates to scale and massing, and just because this is such a significant issue to this application, I want to give both sides a chance to just say a little bit more on it. Obviously, a difference of opinion of whether the scale and massing is appropriate for that setting in the King's Road or not. So perhaps starting with the applicants and then the objectors, could you give us a bit more detail on that, please?
Thank you. I think I'll pass over to Fred, who can describe the relationships on heights.
Thanks, David, and thank you for your question. I think for me, the best judgment you can make on our proposals is to look at the verified views that accompany their submission, and Laura showed a selection of those in her presentation. And what I see is a well-scale building, ground plus 3 stories, replacing a not very good architectural ground plus 3-story building. We are, however, a little taller, and that reflects providing decent floor-to-ceiling heights for the offices on the upper floors. How much taller? Well, we're 18 feet 2 inches taller at the middle of the site, but on King's Road, the change is 5 feet. And that, I think, is modest, and I think you see that in the visualizations. Both your officers and your quality review panel have carefully assessed the impact of the building in the townscape, and both are strongly supportive and recognise that we're going to deliver a high-quality addition to Chelsea's townscape.
For the objectors, I'd like to introduce Tom Ashley to speak about it in more detail, but I'd just make a general point that might be of interest to the committee. Charles II Place was actually built around the same time as the Marks and Spencer store in 1989 to 91. And it was actually, it was architecturally won awards because it was designed very closely to fit hand in glove with the Marks and Spencer store. So any rise in the height it upsets that balance and that equilibrium that exists between the two sites totally. But I think Tom might like to make some specific comments. Oh, sorry, Paul. Sorry.
Thank you, sir. Members, which button do I push?
If you can use the microphone, it'll mean that we can hear you better.
That one. Good.
There you go. Yeah.
I'm sorry that members don't have before them call it before and after cross-sections and elevations of this development. If they did, I think they would see very clearly the significant increase in height and bulk of development on this site. You do not have either a decent model or model at all of the proposal before you, which again I think would assist considerably in your reaching a view on the unacceptability of the increase in height and bulk on this site. The frontage to the King's Road is some 60 metres in length, which means it's comparable to the length of the Peter Jones store at the top end near the square. It is one of the longest frontages in this part of the King's Road. It rises to a story plus a substantial roof level above the level of the existing, and there are commercial stories rather than domestic stories. In terms of the profile through the overall section, if you had before you, and you haven't seen them this evening, and you haven't seen a model, you would really appreciate the very significant increase in bulk in the heart of the site. In my judgment, based on some 40 years in both private and public sector in looking at these matters in London, this is excessive in relation to the setting, not least given the setting comprises 2 conservation areas and a series of listed buildings. I differ totally from the judgments of your officers on these questions, and indeed on matters of fundamental policy when they suggest that London Plan Policy D9 on tall buildings and Local Plan C12 are not relevant. They are relevant, and I just do not understand how officers have reached this view and are advising you appropriately. Certainly on matters of judgment, I part company with the views of the advisory group, the quality review panel, and in limited part with the GLA. But I do note that GLA commendably have recognised that harm is caused to the setting of heritage assets, contrary to the views of your officers. So I think there's an interesting point there. But at the heart of it is the increase in height and bulk, particularly on the frontage of the King's Road in relation to the listed building bang opposite, to other buildings along this stretch of the King's Road, and of course in the heart of the site in relation to the buildings around and the conservation areas around. If you're tempted in any way to give support for this scheme, I would urge caution in the fact you do not have before you a good model of this site to understand the sheer bulk, or really good drawings, sections before you, at least this evening, showing the change from the existing profile to the proposal. We're working on very, very thin evidence at the moment, and it's certainly, in my judgment, not sufficient for you to be making a decision to approve this highly contentious scheme.
May I just add one point? In the applicant's comments, they made a point that this site is not in any of the conservation areas, implying somehow that it was because of the poor quality of the building. But in fact, I think we'll find if you look at history that the reason it isn't in either of the two conservation areas is that it was formerly the Hooper's coach building commercial industrial factory. And I'm almost certain that is the reason that it isn't in either of the conservation areas. Perhaps we've been negligent over the last 40 years of not recognising it had changed and extending one of the conservation areas to include that site.
Thank you very much. My next question is just for the applicants on the maintenance of the planting. And we're told that the planting is important for preventing overlooking and maintaining privacy. How can you be confident that the planting will be maintained all year round, not just for years, but decades, maybe even more than 100 years to come under future owners? And why haven't you proposed other solutions to maintaining privacy, sort of more permanent screens or whatever else? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, on the matter of maintenance, you know, I think it's a statement of fact that's well accepted now that
Sorry, I think...
Would you... sure.
Apologies. We're just going to pause for a moment.
Of course,
yeah. I think everyone, you'll understand. Actually, do you mind putting your microphone off, sir? Now that you've finished speaking. No, obviously you'll understand. It's a principle that we must all be present and hear all of the proceedings. So we'll just pause for a moment or two, if you don't mind. So we can resume. And I think Tom, you were asking the applicant team, weren't you?
Yeah. Yes, just to recap very quickly, it was about how can you be sure that the maintenance of the planting will be retained for many years to come, and did you consider other forms of privacy screening?
Thank you. Well, I think the first thing to say is that the planting is not in itself a device to offer screening for privacy issues. Quite the opposite. I think from everybody's perspective, it offers benefits. The workspace, as I said earlier, and we all recognise, is changing. The values of workspace is important. Outside amenity, the contribution that buildings makes to the environment is important. So this planting is very important from urban greening factor, the water runoff I referenced earlier. I think, I appreciate it's a subjective point, that actually the planting scheme that we've come up with, or versions of that, because it is to be conditioned and will of course be subject to ongoing discussions, will offer a better outlook in terms of what one would look at from outside of the site as well. To the point of maintenance, as I say, I mean, tenants generally are very, very aware now of the environmental responsibility of buildings. They are also very aware of the importance of these kind of spaces and the environments that they create for their workers, their colleagues. So that would naturally translate down into leases and obligations from the freeholder and tenants to maintain space. And in the event, because as you say, plants do die, that they are replaced and maintained. The service charge is the way that is paid for in perpetuity. So I think we can be very confident around that. If it is of expressed concern, we'd be very happy to talk about tighter conditions or anything there to alleviate those concerns.
Thank you. Sorry,
Tom, you carry on,
yeah.
And then Sonia, we can come back.
I'll get one last, it's a quick one. Again, for the applicants, this is actually on the design of the frontage. I just wonder if you could explain why, because it's clearly, arches are the sort of main theme of the frontage, but then the windows are rectangular. And I would normally expect with a sort of arch in the brick to have an arched window, and just wondering why that's not the case in the designs.
Thank you for your question. I think that might be an architectural question I'll endeavour to answer. So actually, we mentioned on the King's Road frontage, firstly, we have a gentle crescent. I think a member of the QRP referred it as Regency-like in its quality, and I was pleased with that reference because it's a classically inspired building with a clearly defined base, body, and attic. The crescent itself actually does a couple of things. It widens the footway, gives space for street trees and seating, but it also emphasises the fact that this site sits at a point of redirection along the King's Road. I come down from Peter Jones and then I move slightly further southwest, and that's what this site is doing. The elevation is a brick elevation with a white Roman brick and Portland stone, high quality traditional materials that will weather well. And although the design is specific to this site, I hope you can see and get confidence for the calibre of detail we'll deliver by the building that we finished at the end of Hornsey Street, just on Kensington High Street. The arches are in brick and they express a two-storey giant order for the main body of the building, and then in the centre, and only in the centre of the elevation, we have that third floor. And we wanted to step the ends down so they address the scale of our neighbouring buildings. There's within that two-storey giant order a slight emphasis of the piano nobile, and so we've projected a bay window out onto the first floor offices. And all of that glazing is finely detailed with a bronze finish, and it's a filigree that contrasts with the solidity of the masonry. The question about whether the top of the windows might be arched is a good one, and we'd be very happy to have that conditioned by detail if Martin and Laura so wished. But at the moment, I've set it as an orthogonal window within an arched opening, and there's lots of Georgian architectural precedent for that sort of approach. But we'd be very happy to look at that detail.
Actually, Sonia, Marwan, and then Gerard. So, Sonia, you go next.
There we go. Thank you. The 1.3 in the report states quite clearly that the submitted daylight and sunlight assessment shows analysis of properties with transgressions beyond BRE guidelines. So I wanted to hear from the objectors their views on the extent to which this proposal would impact neighbouring residents in terms of sunlight and what impact the bulk would have. I know we've spoken about privacy, but what impact it will have in terms of just the feeling of space and getting good sunlight and daylight. Thank you.
Yeah, if I can answer that. Yes, I mean, it's a fact that there are transgressions of the BRE guidelines. So therefore, in the rooms affected, they will have less daylight than they do currently. And I think it's quite clear in your policy that if there are existing below standard situations, that they shouldn't be exacerbated. So that's directly in your policy CL5. But I think it's not just a case of the impact on daylight, it's also a symptom of the fact that this scheme is very large and is very close to neighbouring dwellings, and the properties at the back in Charles II Place are actually built at a lower level, so you've got a sort of a double impact really. Not only have you got a large new building going on, it's higher than it would be ordinarily if both properties were built on the same level. I mean, I think, could I just come back on the planting point? Sorry, that was raised about planting and...
Just briefly.
Yes. I mean, I think, obviously, David Morris mentioned that planting is not in itself a device to offer screening for privacy. Well, I think that's absolutely what it is in this case, because you've got substandard separation distances, you have got balconies, external terraces that will directly overlook neighbouring properties. So that's exactly what the planting is for here. Just coming back to, daylight, obviously the first scheme was also reduced on the impact of daylight on a couple of the Charles II Place properties. But obviously that was a scheme that was dealt with at officer level and not discussed by the Planning Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming to tell us about your reflection on this neighborhood, on your neighborhood. So I really appreciate you are a key stakeholder, I can see from residents, and thanks for leading that, Ron, to protect, and I can feel that the protection of neighborhood, because this is part of our strategy in the council to be a fairer council. So we need to be fairer, to change, to developer, to make our life better, and as well as protecting your interests. So on that basis, regarding the stakeholder engagement in that feasibility study leading to this planning submission, and we've heard that a lot of 18 residents engagement sessions being done. How well you felt that during that engagement you were listened to and you've been accommodated regarding these area of concern, taking into consideration the first opening talked about heritage, so preserving the King's Road heritage. It's a world-renowned brand in the world, King's Road. So I can see the impacts, and then leading from that to our developer who are trying to improve our area, not listening to the local community. From that sense, I can see the level of objection is phenomenal. How well did you work together? How well you were felt welcomed in terms of opening to their consultation or stakeholder engagement? And then from there, Mr. Chairman, if I can, along the line of stakeholder engagement and mapping and analysis, I will direct to the team who are trying to make life better to that locality, is how well as well you've done that mapping, that listening exercise, and you incorporated. So basically, I would like to hear in one place that to resonate there. And thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, well, consultation. I have to say that the architects, we certainly respect the Pilbro partnership, because they have consulted consistently throughout this. The problem is that, and they did mention the feedback and things that they'd done in response to feedback. But, you know, when you have a conversation with somebody and say, your building needs to be 1 story lower and it should remove all terraces and balconies, and in return you get a corner of the building notched away to allow some sunlight onto one particular house that was the problem, then it is consultation, but it isn't very effective. So I think they've certainly ticked all the boxes, and I think Fred Pilbro has been very open from the beginning. But I think perhaps the architect has been between a rock and a hard place, between an owner who wants to achieve certain things and residents who are trying to resist the impact on their houses. And I think he's had an impossible job, and I think that's why the scheme should be refused. I don't know if any of our panel would like to add to that. No. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those very generous comments. I appreciate it. I think in the end we can chart the changes we've made in response to consultation. They're in the officer's report. We've made the building smaller. We've pushed it further away from neighbours. But I think in the end you have to say, well, how are we doing? And I believe you need to trust your officers who are expert and their assessment of the impact on neighbours' amenity and daylight. And they acknowledge that the transgressions of the BRE, if we take VSC values to the rooms, only 2 rooms fail, and they fail by 0.5%. So not 20%, but 20.5. And they also acknowledge that a substantial number of living rooms, specifically 7 at the lower ground floor on Charles II Place, experience improvements to their daylight. Improvements to their daylight up to 9.4% VSC, and they reduce a reduced sense of enclosure because we pushed the new building further than the existing one. So in the end, the conclusion of your officers is unambiguous, and I hope you can put weight and faith in it, because I believe it represents an objective assessment of what we've done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to direct my question to Mr. Forrest, please, because obviously you are clearly, your residents in Charles II Place are clearly going to be the most affected by this. You touched on the terraces and the impact that the terraces will have on you. And having walked around that site, you're pretty protected at the moment. Can you just elaborate a little bit about what impact you think those terraces will have? The condition, the hours that are there, the condition in the use. Can you just elaborate a bit more, please?
Yes, I think the problem with terraces is, for example, I think by a part of the consultation, the south-facing terrace on the first level, the closest to the gardens of 10 houses in Charles II Place, was going to be prohibited from usage, only used for maintenance. In which case you ask, why would you need to maintain something that shouldn't be there in the first place? And our point about terraces is that no matter what conditions are attached, and your colleagues already, Tom's already raised the very pertinent question about foliage and its maintenance, terraces will be used. And it's easy to envisage that at some future date, there'll be office parties, people out on the terraces, and even though the conditions may say it's a time limit, and somebody's had quite a few drinks at the Christmas office party or a regular monthly meeting, who's to say that they're not going to breach those conditions? The cold reality is if the terraces are there, people will use them, and they immediately overlook the houses in Charles II Place.
Can I add?
Yes, Gail.
Yeah, I think the use of the terraces, I think you've got to remember that it's not just about overlooking, but they will overlook. It is also about the noise from the use of the terraces. A condition is proposed on a condition of hours of use of the terraces. That's 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday to Friday. But I think you know, that's effectively saying, well, people can't be in their back garden, the residents can't be in their back gardens, or they can't be in their bedrooms or their living rooms, for example, because obviously the first few houses in Charles II Place, for example, to the east of the proposed development, those houses are exclusively forward-facing. They do not have any rear windows. All the whole development, all the first few houses all overlook the Marks and Spencer site at the moment, so they haven't got the ability to go into rear rooms or look out of rear windows. They were sort of they'll be on display really from 8:30 a.m. till 7 p.m. Monday to Friday. But as I said, the noise issue is another factor which hasn't been taken into account in the submitted noise report. And also, I think it's not just the terraces; it's the windows that look out onto the terraces as well. There's windows obviously looking to the south, and there's windows looking to the east. And I think it's really would be unacceptable perhaps for the offices to have obscure glazed windows. So I'm not sure how that issue can be overcome. And then also, in terms of overlooking as a material planning consideration, the feeling of being overlooked is also an issue, because you don't know when you're in your back garden or in your front window whether or not there will be somebody on the terrace. So you'll have that constant, well, is there somebody there? Can I stand in my window and look out whilst I'm getting dressed? Or it's a sort of, you've got a constant presence there. And as the applicant has said, the planting, you can't rely on the planting to screen views. I know that because I went to 127 Kensington High Street and looked at people in the apartments opposite. It just doesn't work. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, if I can just add to that from the perspective of Smith Street. So all the houses on the west side of Smith Street, as you probably know, have gardens, bathrooms and bedrooms which look out onto Charles II Place, onto the back of Charles II Place, and therefore onto where this new building will be. Now, when Charles II Place was built, it was deliberately built facing away. One of the conditions when permission was granted was that it faces away from the houses in Smith Street in order to preserve the privacy of those houses. We will now be presented with not only terraces but office windows overlooking directly into our bedrooms and our bathrooms and our gardens, which obviously is quite a significant change in terms of privacy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. I've just got a couple of questions. First of all, to the objectors, and I'd be happy if a couple of people commented as you saw fit. To my mind, I would suggest to you that there's a definite hierarchy of buildings and architecture in the area. Clearly, there are a number of buildings which are early, mid-19th century residential buildings, which are of very fine quality. Some of them are listed. They are all in conservation areas, and I think we would all agree are rightly so. I think, to my mind, having visited there several times actually, I think Charles II Place, although it is a modern development, as you say, I think 1981 it was mentioned, I think it's extremely high quality environment, and Charles II Place might well be in a conservation area, but in fact it isn't. But the M&S building itself, I find it quite hard to see how it's possible to say that is what is there at the present is somehow a very high quality building. It's quite obviously something that is rightly not part of any conservation area. I'm just wondering if Mr. Forrest, you and maybe Mr. Valuet or others, and the lady from the Chelsea Society, if you'd just like quickly to comment on that kind of train of thought that I've suggested.
Yeah. No, I think it's a very interesting point, Chairman. I'll ask Paul Valuet, the expert, to speak on it in a moment, but taking your point, I agree. I think the only thing that would stop Charles II Place being listed in a conservation area is that it is only 30 years old. It is a very high quality development, as you say. The Marks and Spencer building, I tend to agree, is not a great building. It's a 60s, fairly, boring shed-type building. And I'm sure that if Fred Pilbara had been the architect 40 years ago, it would have been we wouldn't have been looking at knocking it down now. But I do think the answer to your question personally is that it's the height of the offices, it's the height and the mass that are the problem here, not the quality of the building that's in place. If Fred Pilbara were to build a building the same size as the existing Marks and Spencer building, I'm sure he'd do a much better job than is there already, and it would look wonderful. But I'm sure that won't meet the owner's requirements on space. But I'm sure Paul Valuet can give you a much better expert opinion.
Briefly, sir, it doesn't surprise me that the application site is excluded from the conservation area designation. more mystery to me is the exclusion of the pheasantry block bang opposite on the north side of the King's Road. It's surrounded, however, that site, the application site, by important conservation areas and by a predominant, modestly scaled roofscape and townscape, which is of considerable value and significance. It is that which your committee need to be addressing, and the potential impact of the proposal on that significance. As I said before, I'm concerned about your officer's view that there is no impact and no adverse or no harmful impact. I differ strongly on that particular position. And the increase in height and bulk of the building fronting onto King's Road is, in my judgment, very, very significant. If we had before us some good elevations, and I would suggest if the officers can roll back the images and just go back to the axonometric aerial view, that tells the whole story of what the issues are about. We don't have a model in front of us, unfortunately, but I don't know if we can roll back to the screen which shows the aerial perspective. That one, that's it. And if you actually scope to enlarge that, in my view, is an extraordinarily useful image of the proposal in its context. And I think from that alone, you will get an impression of the extraordinary scale and height of development in relation to its surroundings, not least those areas to the north, to the east, the west, the south, which are embraced within conservation area designations. That, in my judgment, is the heart of the issue. If we had more information, you could see that, I think, more readily before and after elevations and sections. But it's about relationships, about impact and harm. And to say the GLA have recognised harm is created, my view is, yes, there is harm generated for those heritage assets, to use the jargon, and that harm is heading up towards the boundary between less than substantial and substantial. That is what your committee need to be addressing. And in my view, the redevelopment of this site doesn't necessitate building to that scale. If the committee are happy to see the building go, well, let's have a building which there is going to enhance and preserve the settings of the conservation area and the listed buildings, not damage them.
Could I just add a point as well? Thank you. So I think the officer said that the existing M&S has a neutral impact on any surrounding heritage assets. Obviously, the GLA and ourselves have assessed that there is possibly substantial or less than substantial harm to the significance of designated heritage assets. But because the officers have said there is just no impact, or there's no impact of the proposal on any heritage assets, the proper test has not been gone through in terms of testing the harm and weighing it against public benefits. But I think, obviously, we set that out in our rep. But the point is, I think, that we haven't identified any public benefits. And any public benefits that are alluded to, for example, the planting of street trees or the greening up of the access, the Mews area, has already been suggested by council officers that wouldn't be acceptable because, for example, there's actually no space in the highway for that to be carried out. And also on the side access, the Mews access, there's a basement under it, so you can't plant trees on there. So I think the visuals are slightly, the suggestion that street trees and lots of planting will take place are perhaps not actually likely to happen in practice. Thank you.
Chair,
okay, thank you very much.
Can I make one final brief comment to Gerard?
Yes,
I'd like to compliment Gerard on making a very good observation, because I think he set my mind thinking, and I think a better challenge for your committee would be to say, how can this site enhance the conservation areas rather than diminish them? And I think a scheme with the owner that was worked deliberately to try and marry together these two conservation areas, which also adjoin, would be a very desirable outcome.
Thank you very much for that. If you can turn your microphones off, please. I've got just a couple of questions to the applicants. First of all, since we've been talking about architecture, I just want to make sure the King's Road frontage of the proposed building, it's slightly concave. Have I understood that correctly? and that results in a slight increase in the public realm in the sense of the pavement. Have I got that right?
Chair, you have. It's a subtle crescent, and I think it wants to be subtle because we recognise the King's Road is a well-defined, well-scaled street, and our building is a good part of that overall urban ensemble. Because the King's Road itself is inflected at that point, the crescent is celebrating that change of direction, and it does allow a widening of the footway up to about 4 metres, and that in turn gives us space for things like the benching and the trees. But it maintains the coherence of the King's Road.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, I think a celebration of a slight curve in a road, however important, I think it's always something to be enjoyed, I think. Can I ask a separate issue, which again, I'm addressing this to the applicants. We haven't actually talked about the proposed car park. Now, I mean, this is actually contrary to policy. I think we can have arguments about heritage assets and non-designated heritage assets and verified views, but the provision still of a car park is actually non-compliant. I just wanted to ask, at the moment, I understand that a number of the spaces are going to be electric vehicle sort of installed. Would it be feasible, if we wished, by condition, to say that actually all of the spaces, in fact, would have electric vehicle points available? I heard this is a difference between being active and passive EV. Can you make any comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, your jargon's right. Absolutely. So no, that's perfectly possible. That all of the spaces can be served by electric points. That there's a wider issue just about making sure there's enough power, but that's detail. You're right. There is no policy to. We should be losing more of the car parking, and I think this represents a balance between the feedback we've had from the local community, which is that it's seen as a very important asset and a useful asset, and we can all understand why. The desire from policy to minimise car use, and also specifically what Marks and Spencer's value, and the level of parking represents the sort of average usage of that car park. So it's a better performing, better used car park, as it were. Chair, if I may, I don't know if it's possible to come back on a couple of points that have been made, not wishing to sort of have an ongoing conversation, but if you would afford me that opportunity.
I think only briefly, because
that's fine.
Only members of the committee, we're the only people who are allowed to ask questions. You can't cross-examine each other. No. But I think I'd afford you just a sentence or two if there's something very specific that you'd like to say.
Well, I just made a couple of points in the discussion from earlier. I mean, the distance separations here between the proposed building and the new building are very typical of Chelsea. We won't go into it in any more detail, but they are atypical of the area.
I think, Ms. Morris, that's the type of point that properly.
Okay, forgive me.
Myself and my colleagues will take up with officers. You're entirely right to raise it, and it's something which I recognise.
Okay.
Was there another point that just
well, it was on a similar theme, so I'm probably. But it was that I think it is important you understand that the planting is not needed for the privacy. Within the planting, there are setback structures which stop an individual going to the edge of the terrace. That's a very important point. And it's there as mitigation. And I would say, by reference to the daylight and the amenity, we have 91% compliance with BRE and daylight, 98% VSL, 95% NSL, and 98% APSH. This is a very, very well performing building. Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, do you have just a last question? And then Marwan, and then I think we'll probably take a short break, if you don't mind. But Tom, and then Marwan.
Thank you, Chair. I was just following up on the transport point. Firstly, on blue badges, I note there's just 2 blue badge spaces, 1 blue badge spaces, 1 for the office, 1 for the retail. And I know that's compliant with policy, but one of the important things about having that car parking there is for disabled people, and I could well imagine more than one disabled person shopping at the same time. Have you spoken to M&S about whether 1 blue badge space for retail is sufficient? That's question 1. And then also on the transport, just on I note there's quite a significant amount of cycle storage. Would any of that be offered to local residents, or would that all be for people using the office?
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's a great point. I mean, that the blue badge provision at the moment is just policy. I think Marks and Spencers would entirely agree with the sentiment, which is that the customer profile might demand more. So I'd be very happy to, whatever is appropriate with officers via condition, to explore that. But there would be no issue with that from our perspective. On the issue of cycles, yes, in addition to the long stay cycles which are generated from policy for the office, we have a number of cycle stands in the public realm. There's 20 on the, or outside the building, there's another 20 on the other, 18 on the other side of the site, and 22 within the site. So there's plenty of parking for cycles for the public.
Sorry, just to be clear on that one, does that include long-term cycle storage, or is that just for people who are using the shops? You know, if local residents wanted to use that for storing their cycles, is that a permanent solution?
I understand. Yeah. Well, that's more an internal offer through a sort of management of the building. So I think it makes it more problematic to open that to the public. As I say, they are just produced by reference to the policy requirements. Again, very happy to explore maximising the cycle parking opportunities within the public realm. That's in everybody's interest.
Marwan, did you have just a final?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to give a little rest for the applicant and the residents. Just, if you don't mind, directing my question to the officers.
We're going to come to
later?
That very shortly.
Very shortly. I do apologize then, Chair. Thank you.
Colleagues, I suggest we perhaps take a 5-minute break now. We've been going for an hour and a half. And when we come back, our discussion will move on. Members of the committee will question officers. So I'd like to thank everyone who's spoken and helped us by answering questions. But we'll pause now for about 5 minutes. Thank you. if everyone can retake their seats, please, and we'll start again shortly. Okay, so colleagues, we now have an opportunity to ask officers questions. I'm going to suggest, by way of trying to give this section and also our decision-making a little bit of structure, I'm going to suggest the following headings, which really form the basis of the overall planning balance, which is what we have to decide. The first of my headings is land use, then issues relating to design and heritage, then living conditions of neighbours, then sustainability, and finally transport. So I think if we can, who would like to head off? And we don't necessarily have to do them in that particular order, but whoever's going to head off on a particular point, it would be good if we then tried to have those various questions we have and to put them together to give it a little bit of structure to it. So, Sonia, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. Can I start with heritage?
Yes, certainly, of course.
Yeah. It would be great if we could have a clear explanation from officers about the relevance of heritage and conservation to this case, noting that one of the decisive issues is whether the proposed development would enhance the character of the neighbourhood, noting that the Royal Hospital Conservation Area lies to the west and there's a Grade 2 listed building right opposite, so they'll both be impacted, and also noting that the height would clash with surrounding properties on the street. I know Kings Road is mainly a sort of low-rise street scene, and finally noting that I know the design was described as Regency-like earlier, but to my mind it's still quite modern and very much different to the surrounding areas. So how is it that the conclusion you've come to is that it sort of passes the heritage and conservation test? Thank you.
Sure. So we have had the scheme analysed by our design and heritage officers. As you've said, the site borders 2 conservation areas. And similarly, we have, within my presentation, we assessed some of the key views from surrounding streets which are within conservation areas. As you have said, the height of the building is 1 story over what is currently existing. However, in terms of the Kings Road elevation, it's our opinion that the setback of the upper stories from this elevation work to combat that. Martin, would you? I'd just like to hand over to Martin Lomas.
Thank you, Chairman. What I don't propose to do is repeat everything that's in the report, but I think the first point is obviously within the report, officers have carried out a thorough assessment of the significance of the conservation areas and heritage assets and describe the impact upon those, so the listed buildings in 6.51 to 6.53, where the report clearly identifies that whilst the proposed building is within the setting of various listed buildings, actually either its physical or visual separation for the buildings, or in officers' view, when viewed from either the setting of those listed buildings from within the adjacent conservation areas, there is not a significant change in those views, and actually the quality of the architecture is such that, that there is no harm. So obviously we've heard a lot from the objectors tonight suggesting that there is harm, and that officers have concluded that there is no harm to any of the significance of any of the surrounding heritage assets. And that's the view we've taken, and that's why we haven't done a balancing exercise against the public benefits, because there is no need to, where we're identifying no harm. I think the last point on the height of the building, in particular, officers in elevation and section, you know, the building is higher than the existing building. It is taller than some of the surrounding buildings, but you don't experience the world in 2D elevation and section. And actually, the design of the building has been very well handled to understand what it looks like in key views and from the surrounding conservation area. And it's within those views that you have to consider whether there is the heritage harm. So we looked at the aerial view, but we're not assessing the aerial view. That's, it's a representation of the massing of the building, but how that is handled and how it's, how visible or not it is from various points in the conservation area, and what it looks like in those views is the key consideration. And so the officer's view is because the shoulder height of the main building on the King's Road retains a similarity to the existing building, and the top story is set back and actually contained just within the middle of that building. Actually, it doesn't appear overly large and doesn't lead to a harmful impact on the significance of any of those heritage assets.
Thank you, Chairman. Just following up on that, sort of talking in specifics on height, because I know the report says there are other buildings, and perhaps it's a Waitrose development that's referenced, that are of a similar height. And certainly I know if you go down a little bit further towards the apartment building next to the Ivy, I don't know how tall that is, but it's a reasonably tall apartment building. Can you tell us, is this the tallest building in that section? Are there, not just how it feels, but specifically, are there taller buildings in the area, or is this setting a new highest point? If you have that information to hand.
I'm going to make a slight assumption, Chairman, but I think it's an assumption that's fairly well founded, that within the immediate surroundings, that would be the highest building, if approved and built. Obviously, there is no policy that says you cannot build something that's higher than anything else that it surrounds. It's about carrying out an assessment of whether any additional height leads to either impacts on the significance of heritage assets or the townscape generally that are unacceptable.
I think in relation to design, the quality review panel were sort of very complimentary about the proposed new building. Obviously, a number of residents and consultants engaged by them have been rather rude about it. It seems to be there's quite a big spread of opinion. I wanted to ask officers, is that spread even larger than usual? Do we have any comment you would like to make about that?
Sorry, Chairman, can I just clarify the spread in opinion in terms of the acceptability of the design?
The quality of design of the proposed new building. I think my first point is I wouldn't necessarily like this to ultimately inform your decision tonight, but what I would say is pretty much every major planning application we receive has objections in relation to design, and it's really not unusual to see objections to design. and I'd just like to just perhaps, just to clarify for the benefit of people who may be listening, the point about the officers, the final officer conclusion that the design and heritage terms, there isn't a harm, is that if there were a harm, and I find it hard to see how it could be described as other than less than substantial. But if there was a determination that there was some harm, even if it was very small, then it would be necessary for that harm to be measured against some public benefit. I just want to be absolutely clear that that's the correct mechanism, because I think it was sort of obliquely referred to by some of the speakers. That's the right interpretation. That is the as set out in the MPPF. If members were to find that there's less than substantial harm to any or more than one of the significance of the surrounding heritage assets, then that harm does have to be weighed against the public benefits. And then ultimately, having carried out that exercise, you would have to consider your conclusion on that particular point in the planning balance as well. Thank you. I think it's just important that we make that clear. Gerard, do you want to, on design and heritage,
yes,
do you want to pursue
Thank you,
that?
Chairman. We've got pictures, but it's very difficult to get. This is quite a big building. It's going to have quite an impact if it's granted, if it's built, on the colour of the brick. And I just want to, how can we, is there a condition that's tight enough that we see the colour of the brick before it's built, or what? This is going to have a real impact on the landscape there, whether we think it's good or bad. We need to know the colour.
So details of the proposed materials are reserved by, I believe it's condition 3 and 4. They will require us as officers to review samples of the materials and require our approval via a discharge of that condition. Yeah.
Could you just, there's so many conditions, could you just tell me which one refer? Condition 4,
I think. Condition 4 specifically requires the sample panels of materials to be provided on site for inspection and approval.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Tom, do you want to another?
Sorry, yeah, just while we're on design and heritage, just wanted to bring up again that point of arch versus rectangular windows, and whether actually sort of the window mirroring the brick frame around and having an arch on top, whether that's something we could condition if we thought that was sort of better from a design point of view.
If you, it absolutely is something you can condition. Obviously, consideration of whether it meets the test for conditions, but obviously, if it is something that is important as you see it and necessary to make the application acceptable, then condition 3, I would suggest, could be amended to require detailed drawings of those arch windows, including the features that you're suggesting.
That's helpful. Any other? If I could actually perhaps now talk a bit about land use, because I think this is quite important. First of all, I just want to be clear that I've understood the report correctly, that the development plan, I know many people think that the idea that we need more office space seems silly, frankly, being crude about it. But the development plan does support the provision of new office space, doesn't it? Now, there's a good pipeline of schemes which have been approved within the last few years, but that is something that's, I think, supported in policy, and it's also, as such, may not be very popular, but it represents a public benefit for the scheme. That's correct, isn't it? That is the correct way of looking at this in planning terms.
Yes, Chairman. As set out in the report, there's development plan policies both in the London and local plan that support the provision, excuse me, the provision of offices, particularly in town centre locations. This being a major town centre location, which is one of the higher order centres within the hierarchy. Excuse me, Chairman. Bad timing on my part. Just on the point that was made, I think it's worth addressing. You touched on it there in terms of the pipeline. And the suggestion that the evidence for the local plan talks about the objectively identified need already being met by the pipeline that has been approved. And it does talk about that in the evidence, although that's a very narrow picking out of what the evidence for the local plan says. Of course, there's no certainty of delivery over what's in the pipeline. Past trends actually show that we can expect losses over the plan period as well that need to be accounted for. And the employment land study, regardless of talking about the pipeline, does also recommend that there is encouragement for intensification of existing sites, because that's how we have traditionally delivered the office need in the borough. So yes, there is a pipeline of office development, but in Office's view, the pipeline itself does not mean we should disregard this as a benefit for this for highly accessible town centre location and the intensification of office use on it.
Now, colleagues, would someone like to ask officers in relation to this? It's actually more complicated than it sounds, but in relation to M&S, would anyone like to pursue that point? Otherwise, I would take it up with officers. Would anyone wish to? Okay, Tom, Councillor Bennett.
Well, I suppose there's two parts to it. Firstly, what are the guarantees we've got on M&S? How does this development affect their sort of likelihood of staying in the area? What do we actually know in that regard? And secondly, from a policy point of view, I'm conscious that while we can protect retail, it is harder to protect individual stores, because I suppose if we didn't approve, M&S could still move out tomorrow. We couldn't stop them from doing that. So to what extent can we factor that into our decision making?
The company themselves are not a material planning consideration, and you should not take it into account. We're dealing with land use here, not who may or may not occupy that space, which discourages me from saying what I'm going to say, but I am going to say it. In the addendum report, you will have seen a representation from M&S setting out that they've reached an agreement in principle to stay on the site. They do say other things in there that, because of my first point, I'm not necessarily going to read, but I ultimately, M&S themselves are not, and their whether or not they stay on the site is not a material planning consideration. The scheme provides a large format retail space designed for a business like M&S to occupy, and only a business like M&S or equivalent could occupy a space that big. That type of retail, ultimately, it's the space on the plan, the size of that retail unit, and the fact that it is within use class E and restricted to certain categories of use class E through condition that should give you the comforts that you seek.
Move on to living conditions of local residents, or do you wish to pursue?
I just wanted to make a final quick point on M&S, and then we should move on to living conditions. I agree.
Yeah, and it's condition 12 specifically that's recommended to secure the categories of the ground floor, the categories within use class E that the ground floor can be used for, which aligns with the traditional A-class uses, if you like. And that is within our gift. Obviously, within town centres, ground floor uses, for traditional retail purposes, active frontages and the contribution they make to the vitality and viability of centres is critical, and we still do have policies throughout the development plan that support that, despite the is probably the wrong way to phrase it, but the change in terms of the wider E-class at a national level.
Okay, so it's conditions 11, 12 and 13 which are proposed, that the development plan does allow us still to do that, even though arguably we're proposing something that in a way contradicts the thrust of the new Class E, but we are allowed to do that. So yeah. 11, 12 and 13, we can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. All right, thank you very much indeed for that. Gerard, let's move on to consider living conditions, so please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions of the officers, please. One relates to the daylight and sunlight and the BRE. We made quite an issue of it's only 0.01% above, 0.02% above, which I always find interesting. If we have a standard, we're quite tolerant to go above it, and I'm never quite sure how far above it is tolerant or not tolerant. But could you just give me any thoughts about, if it's only slightly over, what would it take in terms of the design to make it fully compliant? Clearly, if it's only a little bit over, it's only a little bit of changes. Well, what could happen to make it compliant?
I can't really answer that question, to be honest, because that would require detailed modelling to take place between the architect and the daylight and sunlight consultants. I think the point or your consideration has to settle on what the impacts of the development as it's presented are and whether you deem those to be acceptable. I think there is reference in the report to specifically in relation to the no skyline, what the BRE says, and that's that they have to be applied sensibly and flexibly, because there isn't any point in cutting sections of buildings out just to achieve a technical compliance. And that's the BRE guidelines themselves. And then just more generally on your point around the kind of transgressions, whether they're 0.5%, 5%. You know, ultimately, the BRE guidelines are one factor in your judgment as to what the impact on daylight and sunlight is. They're an important factor, and you do have to have regard to it. But as quoted in the local plan, there are many factors that you should be taking into account, and it's part of your judgment, but you have to account for character and context and apply them flexibly and sensibly, because mathematical calculations based on a rigid 20% is not the correct way to be determining what the planning policy says. Because, you know, the planning policy does not say you should comply with the BRE guidelines. It's a factor to help you make the judgment in the policy itself, against the policy itself.
Now the second question is really about the terraces, which we talked about before. The first floor terrace cannot be used as a terrace. Would we consider conditioning the second and third floor to be not used as terraces, to be outdoor spaces but not accessible as terraces? Because that's obviously a concern of the residents, that this changes the nature of the relationship.
I think it's my answer to that question is yes, indeed, you as the councillors making the decision tonight could consider that if you consider it necessary. I do believe it is something you could achieve through condition. I would probably suggest that it's not done through a condition similar to the existing condition, but requires the submission of revised drawings to show that, because obviously at the first floor at the moment the drawings do show very limited space and wide planters that were amended during the application to reflect the fact that those terraces were being removed. As it stands, the second and third floor show those amenity spaces, and precluding their use purely through a condition saying they shouldn't be used as terraces. So the building would still be built with that space there. Therefore, I think if you do see those conditions as necessary, as part of that process, you would want to secure revised drawings to similarly reduce the area and increase the planting on the terraces as well, similar to the first floor. And that would be the way to do it. But you know, officers are of the view, as set out in the report, that they're acceptable as they are. But if you are not of that view, then I think a condition can be used.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's something I'd like us to explore further a little later.
Yes. I very much agree. I assume, Mr. Lomas, that the same would apply to the two terraces that are proposed on the eastern side. In particular, the one that I think is it's a third floor, and which it is quite high, and obviously because it looks eastward, it does look towards Smith Street, which obviously at the top of Smith Street does include listed buildings, and I think as well as obviously the properties on Charles II Place at the top sort of northeastern side. So I think that I think a similar argument personally would apply there. So again, the mechanism would be to suggest that there needed to be revised drawings to take account of that desire if we were minded to go in that direction.
Indeed, if you so wish, the same mechanism could be used. What I would slightly discourage you from doing is I think you need to consider the impact from all of the terraces separately, because they will all have a different impact. Just deciding that there should be a blanket condition. You may end up there, but I think you need to carefully consider the impact of all the terraces individually, because the impacts are different.
Tom, living conditions, do you want to?
Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 questions on living conditions. Firstly, can we get to the? Can you help us get to the bottom of the discussion around the necessity of planting maintenance as regards maintaining an appropriate level of privacy for neighbours? Is the maintenance of that planting essential to maintain that privacy? Or is it that maybe the planters that the plants are in do that, or just the fact that it's set back? And if it is essential, how can we be confident that that will continue to be the case for decades into the future?
So I'll start with the planters themselves rather than the planting. So the proposal is for fixed planters around the perimeter of the building, which will prevent people from going to the edge of the terraces and looking over. Obviously, that setback in itself, in terms of where people will be able to stand, creates A, a greater separation, but B, in terms of looking down, obviously you've then got the stepped form of the building, which restricts some of the downward views. So the planting in itself is beneficial. It adds additional screening within those planters. It will be for your judgment whether or not you think the planting is the device that creates the appropriate relationship. There are conditions that require details of the planting. I would tend to agree with the applicant's response that for a building or an office of this provision, that you really should have some confidence that the tenants would want to maintain the planting, because it's an amenity that's being provided for their offices, and it's within their own benefit to be maintaining those, and I'm sure they would be secured through a lease. But all you can have is no security necessary through the planning system, because plants can die and do require management. So your kind of ultimately your worst case scenario in terms of your assessment really should be the situation between the terraces and having the fixed planters there that would be secured through condition 5. The planting itself secured through condition 6, but I think your question, very much around, well, in 80 years' time, what's the situation? Your confidence would have to come through, expecting that the planting was going to be maintained by the tenants. So I'd suggest a worst-case scenario judgment should be based on limited planting in that location.
So one more question on living conditions, a point we haven't mentioned yet. And I know there's a condition around the servicing plan, and particularly around deliveries and that sort of thing, and that hasn't been fully bottomed out yet, but I believe there is a condition that needs to be submitted. I just want to make sure that we can be confident that there won't be sort of an intensification of use, particularly at night, or reversing lorries, bin lorries. All these things are very noisy and very close to residents, and it would worry me greatly if there's a risk that could get worse than it currently is for residents. How can we make sure that's not the case?
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the recommended condition relating to the servicing and delivery management plan. So condition 23 does require the submission of the final delivery and servicing management plan. Of course, we are dealing with an existing building that is serviced here. The proposal will continue to have similar servicing arrangements via the existing service road. Servicing will take place within the building, so there's a contained service yard within the building. Within the report, we do set out in 6.192 the the number of expected servicing vehicles, which effectively are 14 over and above the existing situation, which in officers' view and the view of our transport officers is not significant, but ultimately the final delivery and servicing plan would be secured by condition. That would include the hours.
It's particularly nighttime that concerns me, and details which are probably too far for us to get into, but if more trucks need to reverse, particularly at night, these sort of things make a big difference.
Any other points on living conditions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Condition 17 on artificial lighting. Clearly, developers have to come back with more details on that. Could that include hours of which those lights are? Does that condition include that, or can it? Please.
Sorry.
I know that tends to be
just
on
allow
the
me
type of lighting.
to read. I'm just reading the condition as it is currently worded. So within that condition, you could include a requirement for the proposed hours. The reason I'm just going to trying to get myself around the condition is the condition does already say that any lighting to the southern or eastern side should be the minimum necessary for safety. So clearly, the condition is already restricting it to the minimum necessary for safety. So adding hours to that is of no real benefit, because if lighting is required for safety, then it's going to be required.
Just when I read that condition 17, that strikes me more about the type of lighting and the intensity of the lighting. I would like to see something in there, because we've talked about these offices backing onto the residences. I'd like to see something in there about timing as well.
Yeah. So I think having something in there about timing is perfectly reasonable and could be added if that's what you wanted to do.
Thank you.
Sorry, sorry, I didn't catch that. So it would be feasible to ask that condition 17 did include something about hours?
Yes.
If we wished?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just a follow-up on this regarding privacy. In what condition there it would be highlighted, making sure that's overlooking. I remember we discussed the cascading of the terraces and the height. So where is it being addressed here regarding privacy to the neighborhood and to the surrounding neighbors?
Sorry, I want to make sure I understood your question, so I'm going to repeat the question to you. So you are seeking clarification as to how the privacy of the surrounding properties will be not harmed, effectively. Okay. So I will talk through it, but the part of the report that addresses it is 6.133 onwards, and within that section it talks about the separation distances between the building and the surrounding buildings, as well as the relationship in terms of the height of those and the planters that are proposed in order to restrict where people can stand on the terraces. So the separation distances between The windows on the proposal are, in officers' view, acceptable. There is a suggestion within the local plan that 18 metres is a sufficient separation distance between opposing windows. Again, you know, within the local plan, that's the suggested distance, but it all comes down to your judgment. At the first floor rear, for instance, the proposed building has projecting bays that have metal trellises and planting in front of them to restrict any outlook. And then within the recesses, they have smaller punched windows that are approximately 17.5 metres away from the neighbouring properties. This doesn't quite meet the 18 metres, but in officers' view, because of the size of the windows and the relationship with the neighbouring properties, it's acceptable. At second and third floor, those separation distances increase beyond the 18 metres, but also the second floor sits above the roof line of the Charles II Place properties as well. So you've also got, in terms of your direct outlook, a relationship that isn't looking directly into those properties. So the relationship and the distances, again, officers consider that to be acceptable. To the east, you've got a relationship that is about 18 metres, and again, in line with what the local plan says and the particular design of this building, officers have taken the view that that's an acceptable relationship.
Thank you. Could you just remind us the difference between the distance between Charles II Place, I think it says circa 12 to 13 metres, and the proposed building compared to the current site? At the nearest point, what difference in metres is there?
To the south?
So at the point where the proposed site would be closest to neighbouring properties, how would you compare that to the existing site?
The ground floor of the proposed building is actually further away than the existing building, I think 1.5 metres. So the ground floor, which is a similar height to the existing ground floor shed of the existing building, that's pushed back 1.5 metres, so you have a greater relief. But then, as this building proposes, the existing building does have part of another storey on top of that, but the first floor of the proposed building will be slightly closer than that, and obviously, as opposed to just being a roof, it is an active facade, and then you've got the floors above that. But the separation at first floor is around 17.5 to the recesses, 17.5 metres to the recesses. At second floor, 23, and third floor, 27.
So it's 17.5
Yeah.
in this proposal, not in the current?
At first floor, yes.
And what is it currently, right now? I'm just trying to understand how much closer or further away this new proposal would be, if you have that information in front of you. Yeah. How much of a difference would it make to residents on Charles II Place? Or
so in officers' view, because of the because you've got the step facade, and actually within the presentation there was a view from the garden of either 40 or 42 Charles II Place, I forget which one, but because of the step facade, the impression from this is the ground floor, obviously appreciate it'd be different from the upper floors, is not at all a building, because the ground floor is pushed away and then you have the step facade. So I don't know whether Laura can pull up that image, but it shows that the relationship is actually quite similar in terms of the sense of enclosure, except you've got a building that's further away and sits lower on the skyline. No, it's that one, yeah. No, the one you had. So that one shows the existing on the left and the proposed on the right, with the red line on the right image being the maximum height of the existing. as I say, at the upper floors, that relationship's going to be slightly different in that the upper floors will start to reveal themselves because you're higher up in the buildings in Charles II Place. But this image is from the ground floor and is helpful in terms of your consideration of a sense of enclosure. So officers have said because that ground floor is pushed back and because of the step facade, that there isn't a harmful increase in the sense of enclosure, which is obviously the test in the policy. But that first floor, you can't really appreciate the second and third floor from the ground of this view, but that first floor is around 17.5 metres to the recesses within the bays. And obviously the terrace that you see is secured as being non-accessible.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm going to go back to a previous point. I apologise, but I just found the relevant slide. Perhaps you could go to this slide here. Yeah, that one there. So, to my mind, the quality of the vegetation, the fecundity, I think that might be the right word, of the vegetation is important in terms of protecting the privacy there. And that sort of black line, which says, the arrow that points to it says tall balustrades, screens, direct views at eye level. I just worry that, be it in the winter or be it in a number of years' time, that the vegetation will just allow views right through from the window into the windows opposite. And if that black line screen was made opaque in some way, then that would protect against that eventuality. Would you agree? Or what are your thoughts on that?
I don't necessarily agree because officers think, as recommended, it's acceptable as it is. But I do agree that it's an option available to you if you think from within the office at first floor that relationship is too close, then it's within your gift to condition. I'd suggest securing details of the balustrade at first floor, and within that condition, obviously the purpose being that that it does obscure views through.
So in other words, that could be made something solid that you couldn't see through. I mean, balustrade would imply possibly some sort of heavy perspex or with planting behind it or something. But we could make that solid if we wished, by condition.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I think that's extremely helpful discussion. Can I ask, are there any specific questions to officers about issues relating to sustainability? Does anyone? I think we've had quite a good discussion about it. But Tom, do you want to?
Yeah, I had a question about the trees because it just worried me a little bit in the report. We're talking about a widening of the pavement here and a wider pavement than many parts of the King's Road. And I think the report said we'd try and move the trees towards the curb to make footfall easier, which I can understand, but then said that might not be possible, and if it's not, then we'd just take a payment in lieu of trees. Well, I happen to know we're not short of money for planting trees. What we're short of is space to plant them. And are we, okay, great if it can be planted on the curbside, but if it can't, we're really sure that we'd be better off having no trees at all there than having them halfway along the pavement, which would impact thoroughfare to some extent, but I would suggest less than other parts of the King's Road where it's narrower.
It's entirely within your gift to take that view, and actually we could look, if the committee agree, obviously we could look to amend the particular provisions around that, so rather than a cascade into a payment, it's that the trees are, as they currently are shown on the plan, in the middle of the pavement. We've got to where we've got to through extensive discussions with both our arboricultural team and the highways team, which is ultimately why officers are of the view they are in the report. Committee are entitled to take a different view. In doing so, the particular issues that officers took into account were obviously pedestrian desire lines, but in particular thinking about people with disabilities, so in wheelchairs, mobility scooters, prams, and also the conflict that would be caused because the short stay cycle parking would have to move to the middle of the pavement as well, and you would have the conflict between cyclists coming off the road and across the pavement, that section of pavement. So that was considered a potential issue as well. But you and your fellow colleagues may not agree and may think planting in that position is actually more of a benefit than the potential impacts that arise from it.
I appreciate there's a lot of things which need to be considered, and we can't consider them all right here tonight, but I just would want to know we made really every effort to try and find a place for the trees, even if that had some impact on thoroughfare. And then, if I may, Chairman, just one more question, which is, I'll put it under sustainability. Just with the new pavement, I'm conscious if this development is built, the new pavement will look nice and clean, and it will make the adjoining pavement look quite shabby in comparison. Is there any way to secure maybe a Section 106 payment or something like that to do a sort of deep clean scrub of a significant portion of that side of the King's Road to make it fit in better? I think that visually would actually have quite a big impact for people passing by.
Did you think it's covered in the existing? Sorry, I'm just discussing with my legal colleague.
I'm just thinking about it because there's a condition about public realm, and then there's the highways agreement that will be entered into under the Section 106 agreement. So the Section 106, the highways agreement, is obviously about the public highway. So I'm not actually dealing with the Section 106 agreement myself, but what was your did you want work done to adjoining public highways?
Well,
public highway, is it?
I'm just conscious of the visual change if you're walking across brand new pavement to the pavement next to it, which will, by comparison, it will now look worse than it currently does because it's got that comparison if this is built. So if there's some way to get, you know, a significant portion of pavement at least sort of deep cleaned to make it blend in better and make the whole pavement look better on that side. It's just a thought.
I just wonder whether it's all encompassing within the highways works that are secured in the legal agreement, and maybe again if members do feel strongly about it and that it meets the SIL regulation tests, then effectively that in the heads of terms that could be amended to make specific reference within the highways works that it could include adjacent public realm as well and improvements to that where feasible and possible.
I mean, it is very borderline as to whether it meets the SIL tests, but
in terms of cleansing the existing pavement to make sure that there's a good match, if it can't be secured by obligation in terms of Section 106, we could accept a work-in-kind offer from the developer if they were so minded to proffer that in terms of offering it as a work-in-kind to ensure that the two the interface between the two is good. That would need to be proffered by the applicant as a work-in-kind as opposed to being obliged by the council.
That, Chair, would sound entirely sensible. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes, I think, no, I agree, Councillor Bennett. I think if it is possible to do this, then I think we should, yeah. Any other issues about sustainability. Otherwise, I think we should have ask any questions about under the transport heading. I would suggest that the electric charging points throughout the entire car park. I think Tom's point about possibly considering having 3 disabled bays, so it would mean office, and then there would be 2 for users of M&S. I think that's entirely sensible. I would suggest offices, and I think you sort of indicated we'd be entitled to do that if we wished.
Yes,
Laura?
yes, that would be possible. It could be possible to amend the car parking management condition to incorporate that.
Are there any other points about transport that anyone would like to make? No. Okay. Any final questions to officers before we need to make a decision? Yes. Well, I think terraces fall under living conditions. I think, if I've understood the earlier discussion, we have to be careful that we don't appear to just have a sort of blanket removal of terraces. We have to consider them in turn, and that obviously would have to be a justification if we were going to ask for there to be revised drawings to remove the use of these flat areas as terraces. Is that correct? Is that the right interpretation? Yep. Good. Okay. All right. Right. So, thank you very much indeed. So, using the scheme I've suggested, in terms of making a decision, I'm going to kick off with my own thoughts, and we'll see where we go. So in terms of land use, the main point is that the new office space of a high quality is supported by policy and has to be considered a benefit. I think having new retail space of the type that we are confident major retailers actually wish to have, I think is also positive. That's supported. The exact issue of the fact that M&S appear to have an agreement with the developer, that is really outside the scope of the planning system, and we need to be quite careful that we don't say that is that's some major planning benefit, because strictly it isn't. But as a whole, on the land use front, I think the scheme clearly it must be viewed as positive. Personally, and I think that there will be lots of different views about this, I think in design and heritage terms, there's a wide variety of opinions. I actually find most of the issues are actually rather close to being neutral. I think there's an argument for saying the current building isn't very attractive, but is it so unattractive that you would say it damages anything? I'd suggest probably not. Some people have been very complimentary about the new proposed building. I think maybe, despite Mr. Pilbrow's presence here this evening, I think that might be overstating it a bit as well. In terms of the heritage impact, I think it's actually, again, quite limited. Slightly surprisingly, the GLA suggested that in some in some views, there was actually a less than substantial harm. I'm a bit surprised at that. I think just about on balance, I think because of the taking it as a whole, I would say it's neutral or close to neutral. In terms of ways of marginally improving things, I think Councillor Bennett's point about visiting condition 3 and the exact detailing of the windows, because it's the front elevation of the building, which obviously is prominent, because it's on the King's Road. So I would be inclined to take that on board. Living conditions, my own thoughts are that this is actually the area where, as a committee, I would feel that there is quite a lot that we can adjust here in terms of conditions. I think on daylight and sunlight, my own view is that daylight and sunlight at one level is a mechanical business. It relates to complex software, software programs, and there you go. That's the result. But I think there is an element of judgment that I think, because one important factor is consistency in planning decision making, and I think in an urban context, a large scheme, small non-compliance of some windows in quite a large scheme, I think is something that overall would need to be considered acceptable overall. On the question of the terraces, I think the terraces to the south are actually, the separation distances are quite substantial, but I think if colleagues felt that there was a justification for excluding them, and we've heard that the mechanism for doing that would be to suggest that there were revised drawings which excluded those southern terraces. I'm agnostic about it, but I would be very happy if somebody wished to propose it. I wouldn't oppose it, if that makes sense. I think the question of the terraces to the east, I feel more strongly about that. I think they are definitely closer to buildings in Charles II Place, and I think the third floor proposed terrace is quite a, notwithstanding the planting, it's quite a high sort of elevated platform that looks east towards conservation area. So I would suggest that those should be excluded. I think on sustainability, I think that I very much agree with the point that, and the exact details, I suspect, are for officers in terms of negotiating the Section 106 agreement or other sort of semi-legal aspect about, cleaning the pavements and that kind of thing. I think that's useful and important. I also think the issue about trees, again, I very much support. So forgive me, I've realized I've overlooked condition 17. This relates to living conditions. Going back to living conditions, I think that the issue of artificial lighting in condition 17, I think it is appropriate, and it would be for officers to actually formulate it, I suspect. But I think some restriction on hours added in to the existing condition, I think that is something that is reasonable, and it does contribute to the amenity of people living nearby. Finally, on the issue of transport, I would support all of the amending the conditions, so all of the car parking spaces had electric power points, and also I think if it's possible to have 3 disabled blue bays, then I think that's also something we should do as a matter of if we are able to do it, we should do it. Overall, in the balance, I think that there are benefits of the scheme. the non-compliant part of the scheme is one which I suspect very few residents are actually against, and that relates to the car park. My own rationale, my own thinking, is that I think that on balance, the benefits of the scheme of a new building, which will have tenants, it will actually be used, and a significant retail tenants are likely to find it attractive, that benefit outweighs the non-compliance of retaining a degree of car parking use. And I personally, in that balance, I would suggest that balance can be made. The final point I would make is that I think this evening we've had a very detailed discussion, and we've listened and we've gone through a lot of very, very detailed things that I think potentially are of benefit to people who live nearby. I think we should have in the back of our minds the question that other potential decision makers, which, for example, might include a planning inspector, that other potential decision makers might not be nearly as interested in trying to do things with conditions that benefit residents than we are prepared to do. So having said all that, I'm not particularly expecting people to be particularly in agreement necessarily, but I think that is actually an important factor in considering all of this, that we take these things seriously, we're prepared to amend where we can, but the overall judgment on balance is that the scheme with these various changes to conditions probably should be considered as being acceptable. Colleagues, I've talked quite enough. It's now down to all of us. Would anyone else like to make some comments or say a few things? Tom first, and then Gerard.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just try and go through my thoughts very quickly. Just on land use, I would agree with you, and I am convinced by the arguments that, because I've heard them elsewhere on other occasions, that it's really high-end office space that is demanded in the market right now, and given so many people working from home, and I think to get that high-end office space as well as that high-end retail space, I think sort of redevelopment probably is required. So I am convinced by that argument, and of course we're protecting the main retail benefit of a supermarket type store being on the ground floor. In terms of design and heritage, I'm, as you know, Chairman, quite traditional in my tastes, but I actually do think I can see this as a building that would still be an asset to the road 30 years from now, 50 years from now, whereas I can't say the same of the existing buildings. So I think there probably is a slight improvement there. But living conditions is the one that concerns me. I think, particularly on the point of overlooking, it is a major issue, and at the very least on the south side I would want to see opaque balustrades to ensure that there's no overlooking. Like you, I sort of don't think that necessarily that would need to go to the point of saying no terrace use whatsoever on the south side. I think the small terraces set back with the conditions on ours and with the opaque balustrade, and it should also be attractive on the outside. It shouldn't just be sort of plexiglass for the residents to look onto. But I think that would go far enough to protect overlooking. On the east side, like you, I have more concerns, and particularly that higher terrace I think probably does need to be conditioned out. And then just a final point on sustainability. I would like it, perhaps not as a condition, but as an informative or as a minute, that really every effort must be made to plant those trees, bar a genuine safety or disability access issue. Failing that, I think we really need to get those trees planted and not just take money in lieu and plant them somewhere else entirely. So those are my thoughts.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm still not clear on the mechanism for the terraces. How are we going to take that forward? Are we applying a condition? If so, are we applying a condition to every terrace, or? And I don't know what the mechanism is.
Well, thank you. I think, having followed our discussion with officers, I think it would be within our gift to we would in effect be amending the resolution to say that we felt that to protect living conditions of residents in Charles II Place who were by the southern terraces, that those southern terraces should in effect be removed. The mechanism to do that would be to ask that, notwithstanding the application, there would be revised drawings that would remove them from the plans. And that could also be done on the two eastern terraces. Let me just check with Amanda Reid that is indeed correct.
I'm really turning it back on you, Chairman. In terms of what I've noted, it sounded as though the opinion of the committee was to ensure that the balustrades on the southern elevation to the terraces are solid, obscuring all views to the premises at Charles II Place. The existing proposal already limits use of the lower of those three terraces to only maintenance and servicing, and then the two above that would still exist and be usable, but the balustrade would be of a solid material so as to, even if the plants were to die or become withered during winter months, there would still be zero sightline in terms of visual permeability to those properties. That was my understanding, as opposed to preventing their use. But please do correct me if my understanding is incorrect.
I think, sorry to cut in, Jared. I think if we wish to, I think we could say the first floor southern terrace is only for, well, it's not a terrace, it's for maintenance only. But we as Councillor Bennett has said, that balustrade needs to be solid, because people in the office potentially can look out to the south and see into people's properties. But I think it would be, if we wished, we could say that the second and third floor terraces, that in fact we were going to say there needed to be a solid balustrade, but in fact they could not be used as a terrace. And that would be to protect residential amenity. It's a difficult one, but I think certainly the second floor, it's quite a long way away from the rear of the properties, but nevertheless it is, you are quite high up, looking sort of down into the upper story of Charles II Place, which is is probably likely to be someone's bedroom or something like that. And I think that there is a case to be made if we wish to go in that direction. I don't know, Councillor Hargreaves, what do you feel about that? Is that worthwhile?
Chair, I know this is irregular, but as this so deeply affects my residents, and as Ron is here and obviously has a view, I wonder if you might ask.
No, I'm sorry, Emma. We can't. The discussion with officers. I mean, you can you can see we're pursuing these points in a lot of detail. We're taking this matter seriously, but within the planning system, there are only some things that we can do. There are other things that really we can't. And that's why we're having this quite detailed conversation. Amanda, did you want to come in?
My understanding is that the committee is seeking to safeguard to ensure that there are zero sight lines from the southern elevation of the proposed development to the properties at Charles II Place. That's my understanding of what you're seeking to achieve.
There's that, and there's noise, and there's yes, yeah. There is a noise element as well, isn't there?
Okay.
So looking at the plans, I certainly would like, personally, I would like something to be considered at level 2, definitely. Yeah. I think level 3, you could argue, is set back enough not to disturb.
So Chairman, through you...
This was a bit about taking them one by one.
Yes.
Yeah. So Chairman, through you, we would be happy for you to take us through one by one. In terms of your reference to needing to change the recommendation, from what you've described, as you go through one by one, it sounds as though any such amendments would still fit within particularly point 2 of the recommendation, in that you would be delegating it to me to do what you're asking to do by way of condition and or the legal agreement. So it really is down to the committee, and we'll take.
So I would propose, and I hope colleagues, this is something that we can agree. So the first floor area is not a terrace; it's for maintenance only. But I think having a solid balustrade which protects visual outlook, I think that is something that is preferable to just having planting. The second floor, which currently is a terrace, I think we're saying that that would not be used as a terrace, and it would also have to have a solid balustrade, which again would be to protect the outlook for residents. The third floor, I think I would suggest, and going from what my colleagues have said, there can be a terrace, but there needs to be a solid balustrade as well as the planting which is proposed. In relation to the 2 terraces on the east side, I would suggest that they are quite near residential buildings, and I think they should both be excluded on the basis that there's, on balance, there's an unacceptable degree of overlooking if those are used as terraces. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Can I seek clarification as to what excluded means? Do you mean, and actually no, I won't put words in your mouth, Chairman. What do you mean when you say excluded in reference to the terraces on the eastern elevation?
Well, it can't be used as a terrace.
Okay.
I mean, it's a piece of flat roof. It's part of the mass of the building, but it would be for maintenance only in the way that the southern first floor terrace is. Well, I'm saying it's a roof, but I'm saying it can't be used as a terrace. Are you happy with that? Officers clear about that?
It's not. I'm absolutely clear. Thank you for the clarification, Chairman. It would really come down to whether or not the applicant is accepting of those conditions in law. So I don't know if the applicant would wish to respond now or at some point in the future.
I don't want to get into a discussion here. I think if we amend conditions, clearly the applicant would be entitled to appeal a condition if they felt it was unreasonable. I would hope that they wouldn't, but they clearly they would be entitled to do that. But I think officers hopefully are quite clear as to what we are proposing. Right. Please bear with us. Bear with us.
Sorry, about the terraces. We're clear about the solid balustrades. On the southern elevation, all the terraces, there'd be a new condition, all the terraces to have a solid balustrade, so to prevent overlooking. When you're saying on the eastern elevation and on the, well, the first floor is sorted anyway, but the second floor not to be used as a terrace, Martin did say earlier that the mechanism to do that was to have revised drawings showing that they were inaccessible, not just a condition saying you can't use it as a terrace. But of course, if you're going to maintain it, there has to be some accessibility
yes,
to
exactly.
be maintained. But,
that's exactly, that's precisely
so I don't know
what I'm suggesting.
I'm perfectly clear what you're proposing, Chairman, and I've noted down exactly what you've just gone through, and it would be secured through a condition requiring updated plans to show those terraces as inaccessible, and the additional clause on there that the access should be for maintenance only, and the solid balustrades to the first, second and third floor on the southern side.
Thank you, Jared. I hope that's useful. I think those are useful things. Sonia, did you want to have a...
I don't want to take up too much time because it's getting quite late, but I'll just quickly say, first of all, I think it's great news that M&S have committed to remaining at the site. I do, however, I personally don't, and I hope, take no offense, I personally don't like the design, and I can't really see how it's in keeping with the local area. But I'm not a fan, of course, of the increased mass, but I recognize that the design itself is not necessarily material up to this particular case, and that it's not a conservation area. And I share the concerns of my colleagues when it comes to the overlooking and the living conditions of neighbouring residents, and would support most of the amendments that have been, the conditions that have been proposed by Councillor Bennett and Hargreaves. And I would note as well that I am also, that what you mentioned earlier, I am also slightly wary of a situation in which this case would be handled by a planning inspectorate or the Mayor of London, and such conditions wouldn't necessarily be proposed or agreed on, and we might lose a car park. So, yeah, I have mixed thoughts on this one.
Thank you, Chair. I know it's quite a lengthy discussion we had. I will start where Sonia finished. Same feeling. I have a really mixed feeling about this development. I do welcome change. I do welcome effort to improve the prosperity of our area, especially this development regarding office space in light of COVID. I'm a digital person regarding mobility and prosperity. I welcome developments, but not to be like implanted in which is be started in a local community where there is very strong feeling about this kind of development. I love King's Road. It's a very important road. We should be really, as a council, to be fair. That's where we start fair as well, to where we end up to be greener and safer. And the issue here is about living community, which we cherish, and every development is welcomed as long as it's not imposed. And the strength feeling of our local community, I feel there is no fairness if as a whole. There are sections which is very important, but as Sonia said, to me it's a mixed feeling. I welcome change. We live for change, and COVID has taught us a big lesson regarding space, utility, how we are going to think differently. But I will leave there my thought, Chair. Thank you.
Just a very minor point, but just very minor point. Just want to double check that we are requiring details of the windows to be submitted, and that the note has been taken that it would be good to explore matching the arched windows to the arch. No more than that. That would be condition 3.
I have that note, yes.
So I think going to take a formal vote. Can I just be quite clear with the officers? We've obviously, there've been a great many points. So I think officers, we've taken detailed notes about all of the things.
Yeah.
Are we just quite clear about this, Amanda?
So I think we have all taken detailed notes in respect of the suggested amended conditions and potentially added conditions and added obligation in respect of the proffered works in kinds in terms of cleansing of the pavement. And for that reason, Chairman, I would wish to amend the recommendation at point 2, where we seek a resolution to grant permission and delegate authority to the Director of Planning and Place to finalise the wording of the conditions. I would just say to include the new conditions and works in kind as discussed this evening by this committee. Thank you, Chairman.
Just to be absolutely clear, there's just a couple of things. First of all, with the trees, sorry, right. Councillor Bennett said that he would prefer the trees to be in the pavement. We have this cascade already in the Section 106 agreement. Just want to sort of make sure that we're clear as to what this cascade is going to look like now. So, because at the moment, in the addendum, it talks about the applicant to explore the feasibility of relocating the street trees to the curbside, and if that is possible, then to submit amended plans. If it's not feasible, to pay a contribution. So, so I'm not 100% sure if the whole of the committee have agreed on something different to that. That's the cascade at the moment.
Yeah.
Tom.
I would like there to be an additional step in that cascade if the curbside trees are not possible, for it to return for further discussion with highways and arboricultural officers to re-explore in more detail the opportunity to put them elsewhere in the pavement, with perhaps just a minute from the committee that we think this is very important. Not more, there might be public safety concerns which we just can't get into tonight, but it's important to re-explore it, and I just want to know that it's been looked at in detail before any decision is taken not to have trees at all, because that would...
Right. That's fine.
Thank you.
Do you mind if we quickly go through some of the other conditions? No, yeah. All right. Yeah, I do.
I think it's extremely clear what we're asking for.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
What are the points that you want
just
to make?
very quickly, because I know we're okay with terraces. We've done the terraces to death. Okay, I won't go there. Condition 3, right, we're going to have revised details of drawings showing arched windows on the front elevation. Condition 17, we're going to have details of the timing of the exterior artificial lighting. Terraces, balustrades, we've done that. Trees, we've just covered. The working kind to cleanse the pavements is not going to be part of the Section 106 agreement. It's just a working kind offer. Condition 21, there's going to be 3 disabled bays, 2 for M&S and 1 for the office. And condition 25, they're going to be all active vehicle charging points. So I think, and with the terraces that we've already discussed to death, I think that's where we are at the moment.
Right. So, colleagues, no, it's entirely proper that when we take a vote, we have to be very clear about exactly what it is that is proposed, because obviously it has proper legal implications. So, with all of those alterations and additions to conditions, the resolution is to that we are agreeing to approve. We are resolving to grant, but obviously it then our decision then moves off to the Mayor of London, because he has the right to call it in, or you know, so we aren't just simply granting planning permission. We are saying that we resolve to grant permission, but obviously there are these other steps as well. Okay. My final point that I would make to colleagues is that I think that if we resolve to grant all of these, to my mind, important aspects about conditions and improvements to the scheme, then hopefully they will all happen. If we don't resolve to grant, then potentially it goes off to somebody else to decide, who may be, frankly, uninterested in a lot of the very detailed discussion that we've had this evening. So that would be my final point to you. So I'm going to call for a vote. The resolution is to grant with all the conditions and additional conditions. Can I see those in favour of that resolution, please? Can I see those against? Does anyone wish to abstain? Okay, so the resolution is granted by 2 votes to 1. Councillor Hargreaves and Councillor Alexander both abstained. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed, everyone. It's been quite a long evening, but thank you indeed for coming along. Thank you. Good night.